Okay, so now that we've got our widget built, okay, then we can go on to the surfacing part. Now, one of the things I want to do here is I want to talk about scaling objects and transformations. Let's go ahead and just measure this object. A couple ways to do that, but what we're going to do is go over here to our utility panel and go down to here where it says measure, and then I'm going to hit this new floater and just bring a measuring floater out here into my viewport. Okay. And I can lock this. That way, if I click off of it, it's still locking in the measurements. And what we'll see is that this piece is 5 foot long. And really, what I want to do is make this seem like it's maybe a small part that would be like on a motorcycle or on a bicycle. So 5 feet is way too long. Okay. So I'm just going to click my lock button down here, and I'm going to scale this down, and I want to get it down to maybe about a foot, you know. And so it doesn't have to be that accurate, but you'll see we're down at a foot now. Okay. Now, by doing that, what I've really done is I've screwed up the transformations of this. So in other words, the relationship of this object to the environment is not compatible anymore. So the environment thinks it's one size and the object thinks it's another. So what we want to do is to reset its transformations. We want to reset it so that that the environment knows how big it is as well as the object knows how big it is. Okay. And so I go back to our utilities over here. We click reset XForm right here, click reset selected. Okay. And that's going to put us a transformation on here. Now we don't want to leave this on here. We want to go ahead and collapse it in. So it's going to go convert to an editable poly. And now this has been clean, so to speak. So in other words, the environment knows how big it is and the object knows how big it is. And I'm just going to zero it back out. So it's back at the center. And so now what we have is an object that is approximately about a foot long. Okay. Now, the reason I do that before I start doing the texturing is because we're going to use tileable textures on this, and the scale of it doesn't really make any difference to a tileable texture. And we'll put some custom bitmaps on this, and that really doesn't make any difference. But what does make a difference is procedural textures, because procedural textures are scale driven. Okay. And what I mean by that is that one of the things we want to be able to do is create a material library. And so when we're using procedural textures, we want to be creating them in the correct scale so we can use them over and over again. And if we had this object where it was 5 feet and we created the scale of our procedural textures to match that, then later when we're on something smaller, then our scales would be off and we would have to adjust those. And so by adjusting this and getting it this specific scale, then that way we can use this shader over and over again for multiple things. Okay. All right. So we're going to bring up the material editor. Okay. You'll see we have a standard shader on this. Now, what we're going to be doing is using an advanced shader. You could use V-Ray, Arnold. What we're going to be using is Mental Ray. Okay. So we're going to go up here under our render setup and just turn Mental Ray on. Now, the reason we're going to be doing that is because we want to be using an Ambient Occlusion node. Okay. And so we're going to go over here to our maps. Okay. If we go down to our Mental Ray maps, you'll see an Ambient Occlusion node. Okay. Now, basically what an occlusion node does is it sees anywhere that there's a angle. Okay. And it's going to want to put some shading in there. And what we're going to do is be using this to be a dirt map. Okay. So we're just going to call this one dirt for right now. Now, it doesn't matter if I use a standard shader on this right now. Now, later I wouldn't use a standard shader because it's not physically accurate, but for right now, it's fine. Okay. Now we can go ahead and put this into our diffuse slot. Okay. And then when we render, and I'm going to go ahead and set my render setup to be an HD setup so we get a better quality render. 1280 by 720 is fine. And so when I do a render on here, what it's going to be doing is it's going to be putting me some shading into the crevices in here. Okay, now when I'm doing this, I like to change the background of the environment, and I want it to be a really dark gray, but not black, because I want to see shading on things, and it's hard to tell it when it's on a black background. So a dark gray is better, okay? All right, now, what I'm going to be doing is using this to generate dirt, okay? And right now, it's going to be kind of hard to tell what it's actually doing on there, because it's going to look like shadowing in there. So what I'm going to do is in our diffuse, I'm going to go in here under our general maps, and I'm going to put a mix map in here, and this will make it so it's easier for me to actually see what it's doing. So what I'm going to do is in this top slot, I'm going to put something like a hot pink in there, okay? And in the blue slot, I'm going to put a pretty bright blue, okay? And this will make it so when I put this in the mix, it's going to mix these two together, okay? Basically, it's going to be, the bottom will be the color wherever this is white, and wherever this is making black, it will be pink. So when I do my render now, you'll see it's a little easier to see what it's doing, okay? Now, by default, it's not controlled very well, okay? If you go to its settings, this max distance is kind of confusing, I think, at first, because you would think that this is set to 0, and that means that it's not going to calculate anything, but what it really means is it's calculating all the way out to Pluto. There's no distance. And so we're going to come in here and tell it to start limiting how far it's going to be calculating our piece, okay? How much we want this dirt to be coming in, because we're making this as a dirt map, okay? And now you can see that it's limiting how far it's going out there, okay, which is what I want, okay? Now, one of the things that people, some of my students complain all the time is they want this darker. They want to be able to get this darker, and there's no way directly to be able to get this darker, okay? But what we can do is this. This is a little trick, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to unplug this out of the mix amount right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into general, and we're going to put a composite node in here. Now, a composite node allows us to make layers like in Photoshop. And so if I plug this into it, then we're right back to where we were. It's just passing through here. But if I add another layer and I plug the same thing into that layer and I turn this on multiply, then it's going to double up what that is, okay? And so when I do my render, okay, then it's going to gang up and I'm going to have twice as much in there, okay? So that's kind of how you can boost it to put more dirt in a corner, is by doing a composite node, you know, and if I wanted, I could add another layer and post it in there too, okay? Now, I'm going to call this one dirt any, okay, like the inside. I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to call this one dirt outie. And the reason I'm doing that is sometimes what we want is some dirt up on the top part, okay? And this occlusion node has an inverted occlusion in it right here, okay? So if I go in here and I'm just going to plug it into this one directly, just get that other one out of there right now. And then this is going to put me dirt up on the top sides, okay? Now you can see it adds a lot more in here. It's a lot more sensitive, okay? So in this one, you're going to have to really kind of clamp these down, okay? So it's going to be a smaller amount. So let's try like a 0.4. And now you can see I'm controlling it, so I have a lot less of the dirt up on the top, okay? And you can also play with your spread, okay? That's another setting for how far it's going to go out. It's actually, that's what the gradient on the edge is, okay? So the max distance is how far out it's calculating, and the spread is how far from how dark it is to how light it is, okay? So you can kind of work with those to get between the two of them to kind of get it to where you want. And now you'll see we've got some nice dirt going on there on the top sides. Okay. And then, of course, we can do the same thing with it, which is stacking our layers on there. Okay. So we could double it up. But now what we can do with this is actually put a layer, and we're going to do two of these. And I can put this in those two layers. Okay. And put those as multiply. And so now I'm going to be able to blend these two together. So it's going to have both of these on here. Oops. Forgot to plug it back in. Back into our mix. Okay, there we go. And now we're ganging those up together. Okay. So this is how to create a little dirt node that you can come in here and apply dirt onto the surface. Okay. Now, right now, you know, it's pink. Okay. I do this to make it easy to see it, you know, and a lot of students skip this method and then they never can get things right because they don't really, it's hard to see when you're doing it a different way. Okay. Now, how would we really use this? Okay. Well, this is how I would use this. We don't really want this, get rid of this, trash node. Okay. And I'm just going to call this one, I'm going to call dirt mix. As a matter of fact, I think what I'm going to do for this is we're just going to get rid of that one. We're just going to use this composite. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and set this up for what it would be if we were actually using it. So what I'm going to do is bring out a blend shader in here. Okay. This allows us to blend between two shaders, and these are two standard shaders. I'm going to get rid of those. And I'm going to use an Arch and Design shader, okay? And this shader is going to be our metal. And a good template for your metal is copper, okay? That's a good template to start with metal. Now, if you really look at this, you'll see there's some funky serrations in here. So when they created this template, on their anisotropy down here, they've got it on a map channel, and we want it on automatic. So I'm going to turn that on. You'll see that'll get rid of that. And then I'm going to come into here to our color, and we're just going to create this as kind of a low chroma, more of a kind of a steel blue. Okay. And that's going to go in our top slot here. Okay. And then I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm going to copy this. And this is going to be our paint. And let's see, for a one that I like to start with, which I think works pretty good, is this satin varnished wood. Okay. And then I'm just going to delete all these nodes out of here, and I'm going to use that. Okay. And then I'm going to change this to whatever color I want. I'm going to go for kind of an army green in here. Okay. And that's going to be our paint. And I'm going to plug that in here. Okay. So now then I'm going to apply, let's go ahead and make sure we have this picked, and apply this to it. So now we're blending between these two metals with two different sets of attributes. And then this is going to be our mask between the two. Okay. Now, when we set this up, really what I'm wanting this is to be some dirt, and I want it to be on the paint. So what I'm going to do is on this paint. Okay. So what I'm going to do is use this, let me name this dirt. Okay. And what I'm going to use this as the node to put dirt on this painted surface. Okay. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. We'll do it a simple way first. And so just in the diffuse color map. All right. What I'm going to do is come in here and put a mix node like we had before. And what I want is to go ahead and copy this color that I made in here. And I'm going to put this in the mix node, and the color goes in the bottom slot. The bottom slot is the color of the shader, and the top slot is the color of the dirt that we want. So we're going to go into that slot, and we're going to make like a dirt. We don't want to get it too saturated. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is use this composite node to drive that. Okay, so we're using this to add this on top of that for our paint node. Okay, so if we go in here right now and we render, you're going to see we're going to get the metal. Okay, we're not getting the paint. And the reason that is because this blend node by default is 100% the top one, which is the metal. So this is our mix amount. So we need to go ahead and change this to 100, and then that will be 100% of the paint. So when we render now, it will be just the paint in here. And so now you can see right off the bat, I'm able to add dirt onto our painted surface. And I've done it in a procedural way that this shader can be used over and over again to generate that dirt. Okay. And of course, I can gang this up and add more and more dirt according to how I want to layer up these ambient occlusion nodes. Another thing you can do is by default, these nodes are set to 16 samples. You can actually turn these down like to 8 samples because dirt is kind of not smooth. Okay. And this will make it have a little bit of a grittier dirt on there and will render a little bit faster. Okay. So normally when we're using those as an ambient occlusion on something, we might be kicking it up, but sometimes you might want to kick it down that adds a little bit grain, like we're seeing the grain of the dirt in there. So that's something that you can play with. Okay. I'm going to leave it at 16 for right now. And so there is a quick dirt node, okay, which is really nice, okay, on our paint. Okay. So now the next thing we want to do is to come in here and we want to start blending our metal and our paint together, okay, these two together. And I'm not going to use an occlusion. I could, but I'm not going to use an occlusion to do these together because I want it to break up a little bit more. And so we're going to do it a different method. Okay. So this is the end of this video, which is basically how to create a dirt node to create dirt on our surface without having to unwrap it, hand paint it, and we're able to get dirt across the surface. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.